that development divide. So they need a space, whether it is the atmosphere as an environmental system or the oceans as an environmental system. They are saying that we need a space to grow. We also have a right on these resource systems. So very interestingly, one of the principles, common but differentiated responsibility. This Earth Summit happened in 1992 in Brazil, one of the most important environmental summits in the history of mankind. And some of the principles, the 27 principles that appear in the Rio Agenda, they are still being reiterated. If you go through the document of Rio Plus 20, then you will see that almost all paragraphs starts by the nations or the countries saying that we reaffirm the principles of the Rio Summit. We re-emphasize this particular principle. And these 27 Rio principles, they're extremely important because they represent what was agreed to. So before Rio, there were these conflicting viewpoints. The global north saying that environment comes first, it cannot be compromised. The global south saying that development has to come first, we need space to grow. The 27 Rio principles was the convention, was a charter which was internationally negotiated, which is the agreed outcome. And they speak of centrality of human beings, sovereign right of nations over natural resources. So they understand, they acknowledged the distinction between developing countries and developed countries. And they acknowledged what has come to be a defining principle in all international negotiations related to environmental change, whether it is climate change or ozone hole or oceans, desertification. All this is being driven by this common but differentiated responsibility. So it's a very powerful principle, CBDR. What does it say? It's a common responsibility. It's a collective effort that is required. Because we are talking about global commons, atmosphere. It is nobody's property. No one nation can actually say that the atmosphere is mine. No one nation can say that I can spew smoke to my atmosphere and nobody can question it. Because it is a global commons. If I throw smoke into my atmosphere, then at some stage it will fall down as acid rain in some other country. These are transboundary resources. That is why they are called global commons. You cannot fix boundaries to this resource. So if British Petroleum spews oil, there is an oil spill on the Latin American coast, then the fisheries on the Western African coast, they die. So these are global commons, and any effort has to be collective. All countries has to commit to it. So it's a common responsibility. But at the same time, it is a differentiated responsibility. Not all nations can be expected to take the same amount of responsibility because capacities differ. Because there is a difference between developing and developed countries in terms of the access to financial resources, the access to technology, and the access to human skills. So it has to be a differentiated responsibility.
I have a small question. Carbon credits that are given, is it differentiated based on the economic growth of that country? Like India, whatever carbon credit you get, what will be the difference between what you will get in Europe and what you will get?
It's more of a market mechanism. Market mechanism that is a manifestation. It's not exactly a differentiated. What is a differentiated responsibility? The Kyoto Protocol is an example, where Annex 1 countries or richer countries, they took mandatory targets of cutting down their own greenhouse gas emissions. While the rest of the countries, the developing nations, they are not mandated to take the emissions. So that's a differentiated responsibility. But carbon credits come in because when we are talking about a common responsibility, it's a collective effort. It means any effort that we make, any path that we pursue has to satisfy certain criteria. And one important criteria would be the cost-effective criteria. Any strategy that you pursue has to be cost-effective. It has to be least cost. And that justifies a collective effort. But how do you do a least cost effort? How do you bring out a least cost strategy? By having a mechanism by which you can actually have measures undertaken in low economic countries, in countries where costs are less. So that brings in the carbon credits part of it. But anyway, we'll go into that later on. But that's not a differentiated responsibility, but it is a tool to, tool to operationalize a cost-effective strategy to meet that collective responsibility.
It is global commons. Then what I am trying to ask is, carbon credit that I earn in India should be more than what it is, say, in the US.
Carbon credits are for India. They are for India. That is the mechanism. When you talk about CDM, the credits that are earned from CDM is for developing economies. So richer countries can take or can finance emission reducing strategies in developing economies because it costs less there. So they need not have to spend more. So it's a cost effective strategy. But at the same time, what do the developing countries gain? They gain in the form of carbon credits, which they can trade and get resources. So it's a market mechanism to operationalize that collective effort in a cost-effective manner, right? So, yeah.
For these carbon credits, it said that it's just basically transferring pollution from one part of the earth to the other. So, is it an effective mechanism?
That's a different question. We are kind of diverting to carbon credits, but these are leakages. It's an institutional mechanism. It's a market mechanism. So there has to be certain safeguards followed. So how do you monitor if a particular emission reduction project or emission reduction program is put in a particular country? Then there has to be certain stringent safeguards attached to it so that you do not have leakages. If you do not have stringent safeguards, then there will be leakages. So the whole purpose would be lost. So it's not a fault of the mechanism itself. It's how you implement it. And if in the implementation there are leakages, then it is more of an institutional failure rather than a failure of the tool itself or the concept itself. Right? So the whole approach should be how do you strengthen institutions. And often it is a question of capabilities also. In certain countries, when you see the whole, since we are on carbon credits, when CDM came out as a Kyoto mechanism, you see India, China coming out with a lot of CDM projects. But where it should have gone in African countries, it's minuscule. It's almost negligent. One would have expected, more CDM penetration in African countries. Why didn't it happen? Question of capabilities. Indian, producers were smart. They could take advantage of this financing mechanism. They could take advantage of this market mechanism. So you have a concept which can create a leveling field. But at the same time, you have to bring in capabilities to operationalize that concept. So that is why after Kyoto, the Bali Action Plan emerged, which created, which talked about 4 pillars. That if you are to achieve this collective outcome of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then you will have to have that transfer of technology, finance, adaptation and mitigation programs, the 4 pillars of Bali Action Plan. But anyway, that's a separate track.
You said that the global north has been long propelling the idea of environment first. But how successful has it been itself in, making the carbon footprint go down?
It has not been successful. It has not been successful. That's why we are now, in a situation where international negotiations are not taking us anywhere. It's in a very fluid state because rich countries have defaulted on their commitments. The Kyoto Protocol asked the industrialized nation to take up commitments which were by themselves very weak commitments. It was not even sufficient. But even on that, they couldn't meet the commitments. And at the same time, don't put the blame only on rich countries. Countries like India, China, Brazil, which are the emerging economies, they have also been very hesitant to take up responsible actions, though the situation is changing. Now we have a national action plan on climate change. Most of the emerging economies are taking up voluntary commitments. So the whole paradigm at the international negotiations front, the north-south conflict over conventions, over agreements, that has reached a stage where it is a trust gap. Political leaders are talking about a trust gap between north and south. Poor countries are saying that the rich countries should walk the talk. They should put money in their mouth. So you see, you hear these kind of phrases. And the rich countries are saying that poor countries have to be responsible. Because the emissions, the current flux that is changing to, most of the emissions are happening in the emerging economies. These are large population economies. But that is a complicated thing. It will require another lecture to go into that entire thing. Right now we are still in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, when institutions were emerging to evolve that consensus about sustainable development. So it happened over, we'll just skip this because there is a timeline. Different things happened over the 90s. The Global Environment Facility was established at the at the global level to provide financial resources to advance the goals of environmental conservation. 2005, 1992 was the Earth Summit. Major milestone came 5 years after, 97, when the Kyoto Protocol was put in place. So that was a major 1997 was a major thing, when it was Rio +5. Another major thing is the 2002, another 5 years, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, which happened in Johannesburg. So very importantly, this Rio Declaration, which happened in 1992, it also came out with a program of action. They called it the Agenda 21. It was an agenda of 21 programs, which was intended to be implemented at the global level. And Johannesburg in 2002, it was 10 years after Rio. Nations were dissatisfied, stakeholders were dissatisfied that nothing was happening on Agenda 21. So Johannesburg came up with a plan of implementation, Johannesburg Plan of Implementation. And now 10 years after Rio +20, again people are dismayed that nothing is happening. So paradigms have changed, concepts have evolved, but when it comes to practice, there are still challenges. That's why we are having a workshop, Challenges to Sustainable Development, right? 2005 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment was a major exercise. It looked at all kinds of ecosystems and advanced the notion of ecosystem services. What are the key services that we are getting out of ecosystems? So you have provisioning services, you have regulatory services, you have functioning services. So ecosystems, managing ecosystems means that the stocks have to be kept intact. It is those services that you can make use of. And you have to use it in a sustainable manner. It's like keeping your money in a fixed deposit account. If you eat into the principal, then your interest goes down. There will be less and less of interest income. But if you find a way of living on your interest income, then you are using your financial stock in a sustainable manner. It's the same with any ecosystems. Keep the stocks intact. So the ability to produce over generations is not affected. But often we don't know to what extent services can be used. Because demographic drivers are huge, population pressures are huge, aspirations are increasing. So these are all drivers. You must have heard about the IPAT framework. I is equal to PAT. I is impacts, environmental impacts. And what drives these environmental impacts? Population, affluence, technology. A very famous impacts assessment framework that was developed in the mid-70s. the IPAT framework. So these are the three drivers: population growth, affluence, rising economic growth, and technology. Then in 2007, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that came out with its fourth assessment year. And this was the year also when IPCC, along with the US Vice President, they received the Nobel Prize for Peace. So for the first time, it was recognized that environmental degradation can cause consequences for human peace and stability, world peace and stability. That was the reasoning behind awarding a peace prize to a scientific body like IPCC, which was talking about stresses that may be arising because of climate change. So this is Rio Plus 20. I have already spoken about it. So Rio was based on the report Our Common Future. Rio Plus 20, the document that has come out, it is titled The Future We Want. And it talks about eradicating poverty, the greatest global challenge. So somebody spoke about myth. So Rio Plus 20 brings in poverty eradication sharply again. So we cannot wish it away as a myth. If you go through the outcome document, you will see everywhere sustainable development hyphenated with poverty eradication. Sustainable development and poverty eradication has become the goal. That's the shift that has happened when we compare it to Rio. Rio was talking about sustainable development. But in achieving developmental goals, the importance of eradicating poverty is now getting primacy. Because this is an acknowledgement that unless you meet that developmental goal of poverty eradication, you cannot effectively address environmental conservation goals. And it is an indispensable requirement of sustainable development. And this Rio Plus 20 also brings to the forefront the concept of green economy. Green economy as a tool, as a means by which we can achieve sustainable development. So what's a green economy? It's basically an economy in which all the material flows are resource efficient. All economic activities, be it production, be it consumption, they are all resource efficient. So you will hear the term sustainable consumption and production patterns. So the way you consume, the way you dispose of your waste, the way you manufacture, all of this, if it is done in resource efficient way, then you can say that you are moving towards a green economy. A variant is low carbon economy, which talks about bringing down the energy use, the energy intensity in the uses, in the consumption and production activities. And very importantly, this Rio Plus 20 also recognize the role that political leadership can play. So right from the beginning, the role of institutions have been central to the concept of sustainable development. Remember the three pillars: economy, society, and environment. So in these three pillars, in this framework, institutions play a key role. What are institutions? What do we mean by institutions? Institutions are basically rules of the game. They can be formal rules or they can be informal rules. So rules, norms, practices, how they are combined to regulate our economic activities, these are institutions. Market is an institution because it is a body of rules. It's a body of rules because you need to have ownership. You need to have buyer and seller coming for exchange. And rules define how ownership is enforced, how that exchange happens. So the market functions on the basis of a set of rules. So market is an institution. State regulation, public policy, that's again a set of rules. How do you regulate? How do you pass laws? So legislation, executive orders, administrative arrangements, they are all intended to achieve state regulation, state control. So that again is a institution. Communities are organized on the basis of rules. Community organizations, they can be, somebody spoke about Ban Panchayats, so they are also institutions at a local level. So institutional arrangements are the means by which this sustainable development plays out, the sustainable development goals are met. So right from the beginning, the importance of institutional arrangements has been understood. But Rio Plus 20 brings in political leadership as an add-on to that institutional arrangement at a global level. So what it is proposing, that we have a very high level intergovernmental political forum which will take the leadership on environmental conservation issues. So this is something which is again a progression on the earlier convention. Then sustainable development goals. Most of you would have heard of Millennium Development Goals. So the Rio Plus 20 talks about sustainable development goals. So Millennium Development Goals, the target is to achieve them by 2015. It's a different matter that in most of the goals we are way behind it. But what happens beyond 2015? Do we continue with the Millennium Development Goals? So what Rio Plus 20 says that we'll make extra efforts, we'll take urgent action to meet the Millennium Development Goals by 2015. But beyond that, we are looking at more radical sustainable development goals. These are more long term. And they bring in sustainability aspects in a much stronger way. But what are these goals? They have to be negotiated. So what the Rio Plus 20 says, that a process of negotiation is to be initiated. So they will define what kind of goals the global community can take up as sustainable development goals. So that's the Rio Plus 20 outcome. So this brings us to the end of the sustainable development concept. I'll take another 10 minutes to introduce the human development concept. I'm not going into Millennium Development Goals. I understand it will be covered in another lecture. Human development, this concept becomes important because most of the measures that have come up, for monitoring progress on sustainable development, that are related to human development. And sustainable development is about meeting people's needs. So how are people needs met? How are developmental goals met? For that, the human development concept has emerged in the 90s, to highlight the critical relation again human population and natural resources. But more importantly, it brings in the role that human capabilities can play in achieving sustainable development. So while sustainable development is the overarching goal, and you have means like technology to achieve it, the green growth is a tool which is basically resource efficient technology. Strategic knowledge, scientific knowledge is a tool again, is a means that will contribute to sustainable development. Stakeholder engagement, public participation, decentralized governance, all these are recognized as means by which we can reach sustainable development goals. But an important part of these means is about human capabilities. But what defines human capabilities? It's about our skills, our education, our health, our access to resources, access to decision making. All this will define our capabilities. So it's postulated that if you advance capabilities, so if a society is in a direction, is progressing in a direction or is moving in a direction whereby capabilities are continuously being enhanced, then we can say that it is also in the direction of sustainable development, sustainable human development, because you are enriching the means by which the sustainable development goals can be met. So enlarging human capabilities. In fact, this is a very radical connotation of development. So the shift from economic development to human development. Economic development is about, most of you would be knowing the distinction between economic growth and economic development. Growth is about progression. Growth is about continuously increasing the material goods and services. The larger you produce, you are growing, the economy is growing. But development brings in